I love George Clooney's movies, but I don't really give a shit what he thinks about who should be the nominee for the Democratic Party. Do you want me to start for you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can.
obviously,
I
yeah.
always hate starting.
Hi,
these
Jamie. I'm
things. Yeah.
happy to have you here today.
Well, Hunter Biden, welcome to At Our Table with Jamie Harrison. Man, it is so good to see you here in sunny Columbia, South Carolina. It's hot as hell here today, man. So I know you're from Delaware, so I hope you can handle the heat.
Oh,
that
you
we
know,
have
I've been
here in
down
South-
here enough times to
Oh, I
know the
know.
heat. Yeah.
But it's like
Yeah.
for the Biden family, South Carolina is a second home.
That's exactly
so
right.
welcome back home, my friend.
Well, thank you, brother.
You know, as we talk about this podcast at our table, I'll often like to lay out the ground rules, which is this is family talk. I remember coming home from college and my grandfather saying to me, he said, I know you got that fancy degree, but when you come here, you got to speak plain to me.
Yeah.
I don't use all those fancy words. And so that's what this is. It's family discussion. And I just want you to feel comfortable, to speak plain, talk about the issues that you're thinking about, but most importantly, the things that are on your heart. And I think that's really, really important. And the reason why I wanted you to be one of our first guests on At Our Table is because, you know, often in politics, we see caricatures of people. We see the people that the pundits want you to see in the light that they paint you in. We see, how a person can be defined by either their allies or their opponents. But I thought that you should be able to come here and sit at our table and talk about who Hunter Biden really is, so that it's coming from you instead of coming from the right-wing media or somebody who's just opposed to you.
Yeah.
So my first question to you, my friend, is who is Hunter Biden?
Well, number one, I'm honored that you asked me to be here, my friend. The number one thing that I am is I'm a dad, and I'm a son, and I'm a brother, a nephew, and I am a part of a family that I adore and revere, and try and with every fiber of my being to honor, and that to me is first and foremost.
There's some folks who don't know anything about your background,
Yeah.
right? All they see is what Fox News says or
Yeah.
what the crazy right-wing folks have to say about it, or
Yeah.
or media folks
Yeah.
that have an agenda.
I know
Right?
all those people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us about you. Where did
Yeah.
you go to school? Like, what's your background?
We have a similar background.
Yeah.
I went to Georgetown University, and after I got out of Georgetown, I did a thing called the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, which is like a domestic Peace Corps, where you go and live and work in underserved communities. And then I graduated Yale Law School, and
And you were there when Cory Booker was there.
yeah, I
and-
think
and-
Corey and I overlapped. I
Yeah.
think he graduated after me a couple years, but yeah, but it's been hit or miss lately with Yale law
Oh
grads.
God.
Exactly. Some are doing real well, and some of them are not doing so great for the country.
As we
But
like to say in South Carolina,
Yeah.
for some of them, bless
Yeah.
their heart.
I don't know what classes they took, because it certainly weren't the constitutional law classes that I took. But I graduated from Yale Law in '96. And I went on to work. I worked in the general counsel's office of a big national bank out of Delaware, and then I went to work for President Clinton for 2 years. I had the longest title in government. I was the executive director of e-commerce policy coordination for the Department of Commerce, when we used to call it e-commerce.
Yeah.
Yeah, way back when. And I got out of the Clinton administration in 2001, in January 2001. And I opened a law firm, and the principal group of people that I represented were Jesuit universities. And then when I was there, I started to teach at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service in the master's program, and I was an adjunct professor there for 4 years. And I started to serve on a number of boards, and so I was the vice chairman of the board of Amtrak. I was a chairman of the board of the Truman National Security Project. I was chairman of the board of the Center for National Policy. I was on the board of Catholic Charities. I was the chairman of the board of the U.S. UN World Food Program. Here's one thing I do want to talk about
Yeah.
because it's near and dear to my heart is this. If you're doing anything in relief work anywhere globally, what the people that you will meet are always singular in their dedication to making the world a better place, and that was the staff of USAID.
Yeah.
Literally, the greatest force for diplomacy that the United States had, I can say, I can attest to from my personal experience, is USAID. We were providing life-saving antiretroviral drugs to people that were born with or infected with HIV so they did not develop into full-blown AIDS in a deathly, horrible, horrible, painful death. Okay? At least 30% of those that are on those antiretroviral drugs are children that were born with HIV.
Mm.
Kids, babies. They're not getting the drugs right now. They're going to be dead within 30 days. Over 300,000 people estimated have already died globally because the funding has been cut off. Every one of the subcontractors has been fired, and the contracts have been that distributed the aid and the supplies. And forget about the drug treatments for tuberculosis, for AIDS, for things that we're doing, which, by the way, will cost the GDP of Southern Africa, which will impact us by over $4.5 billion in the next 5 years. And here we are ceding all of that ground to our foreign adversaries. Because when you walked into a refugee camp in, let's say, in Dadaab, Kenya, okay? You walked into that camp. What did you see? You saw boxes and bags of food, and it said USAID, a gift from the American people.
Mm.
And we've literally ripped that away.
And you know who's
For
going to
what?
fill the void? China.
That's exactly who's going to fill the void. And by the way, they're not going to fill the void in the way that we would,
Nope.
which is by saving lives and doing things. What they're going to fill the void with is they're going to be paying off people
Yep.
to be able to take the natural resources and to take possession of land that they desperately need. I know at least a dozen of the Republican senators that are aghast at at what's happening to USAID and foreign assistance in this last 100 days, and realize that it is just a disaster for the United States of America for that to happen. And then the second thing that I'm working on is, I believe, one of the biggest problems, and I'm going to focus locally in California, is as it relates to homelessness and tenants' rights
Yeah.
in housing. And so I'm working with a group in Los Angeles, the largest provider of legal services. I'm on the development side, but
Mm-hmm.
of helping people that are facing one of, I think, the biggest crisis is for people to have a life
Yeah.
to live, is to have a secure, rent stable environment that does not lead to a loss of housing and imminent homelessness for families, for kids. And I think something we can all solve together if we actually worked on it. We're a rich nation. We can pay for it, but we can't do that and also give billionaires trillions of dollars in tax cuts at the same time. It's like, I mean, it's pretty easy, to decide
And,
and not be fooled by it
yeah.
anymore.
And I think we have to be bold in expressing that to the American people.
Yeah.
The great thing about your background, again, I don't think most people know the depth of the work that you've done, the depth of the work you've done in commerce, the work that you've done in the law, the work that you've done in terms of foreign policy.
Yeah.
And what you've done just now is laid that out for a lot of folks who probably are hearing for the first time that
Yeah.
you're no slouch. Like you've been doing some damn things, right?
They robbed us all of the truth in many ways. For a very long time, I have not sat down to do things like this
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't want to become even more of a distraction. And they very much made certain that I would continue to be the central distraction of the past 4 years. And I think there's an opportunity now to set some of the records straight. But the truth of the matter is I'm not so interested in looking back as I am looking forward. And I finally have an opportunity without all of the noise. I mean, there's still a lot of noise. Don't
Yep.
get me wrong, but without a lot of the most weighty obstacles in my way to be able to actually go back to what I was doing before life got turned upside down.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, a lot of my life got turned upside down by my own choices.
Yeah.
You know, I the I think that I'm either the most notorious or famous or recognizable addict in the world, and I don't say that with any pleasure or I say it with all humility.
Yeah.
And what I have found from that is an incredible reservoir of strength that comes from people that come up to me and tell me their own story. I know you know this because we've talked about it before. Is that I don't know any family, I don't know any individual that doesn't and has not been impacted some way by
That's
addiction.
that's exactly right.
You remember this, impeachment inquiry and all
Yeah.
this stuff because of, somehow the Biden crime family, which you got to be, effing kidding me, as we watch what goes on here.
And
Okay. Yeah.
I do want to get your
Yeah.
thoughts on
Yeah. And I will. I'll
the
tell you that.
double standard that
Yeah.
we
Well,
see
I mean,
with
it's
other
almost
families.
too hard to even talk about, but in the sense of I don't, mm, one thing I cannot afford is to be angry all the time.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
and I mean that as a person in recovery. I cannot be angry all the time. I want to be looking at the solution. But I'll tell you a quick funny story. And it's not funny, but it is. It was revelatory. Yeah, I get called to testify.
Mm-hmm.
I go into this little room and it's like literally all 18 members, Republican members of the committee are on one side. They're not asking any questions. They're letting their lawyers ask questions.
Uh-huh.
But at one point, they go into my drug use, and they're asking me questions that are really, I mean, just completely inappropriate and irrelevant to what they were trying to get to.
Yep.
Okay, it was just to embarrass me,
Yep.
to get on paper in a way to be able to embarrass me. And I looked across the table at, I mean, it was literally half the Judiciary Committee and half the Oversight Committee that were sitting in that room, the Republicans, and all the usual suspects,
Mm-hmm.
from Marjorie Taylor Greene to Boebert to Matt Gaetz and I looked at them. I said, raise your hand if you have not had a uh, a personal issue with addiction or you personally or someone in your immediate family. One of you raise your hand. They all look down at their hands.
Mm-hmm.
They all look and they know this. We all know this. And if I could be of service in any way, is that we bring that discussion out into the open because as much as we know that's a problem is what I think 31% of of adults in the United States of America have suffered from addiction at one point or another.
That's exactly right.
And so the great gift that was given to me is the ability to be able to talk about it without shame and without guilt and to be able to talk about it honestly and openly. And it's kept me clean and sober.
Well, and the sad part for me, Hunter, is that they're so desperate to score political points that in the end of the day, what they are residually doing is making it even harder for those folks who are struggling with addiction to want to come out, to want to seek help, to want to reach out to the folks that they want. Because if they see how you and being open about your story, being open about addiction, being open about the recovery that you're on, and they see how you get attacked for being open and
Yeah.
trying to get on the right footing,
Yeah.
then the question is, why the hell would I want to do that to myself?
Yeah.
Why would I want to subject myself to that if I see that's how they're treating him?
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's the real sad part about all of this. And again, it's done by folks who claim to be Christian most of the time, I guess, when they go to church on Sunday, but then aren't Christian like during the rest of the week.
I tried to figure out for a long time, and I've stopped, of why uh, it was such there's such a ongoing and sustained interest in the story of Hunter Biden, not the story, because the whole corruption Biden crime family thing has been so debunked
Mhm.
so many different ways. But the thing that I finally realized it's not just out of cruelty. It's also about money.
Yeah.
And if you put my name on your Twitter feed or on your blog or whatever with a picture of me, that they were hacked or stolen or fabricated with my shirt off in a motel room, doing drugs, the amount of traffic doubles to your site. It's all about money, and they figured that out really quick. The New York Post figured that out really quick, and that's why they were literally at one point writing, I think, an average of 2.5 stories a day about me for an entire year.
Well, I think what they realized that, if Joe Biden's Superman, his kryptonite is his family, and the best way to get at him is
So,
through his family, right?
so I would argue, and I get your point. I would argue that that's obviously what they thought.
Mhm.
What they didn't realize that his superpower was also his family. And
Mm,
so,
that's a great point.
and so the greatest source of your strength is often the
Yep.
thing that people will target.
Yeah.
It does not mean that it'll crack.
Yep.
And can tell you this: here I am, here I am, and I'm in a better place physically, emotionally, spiritually than I've ever been in my life. And I maintain that through the last 5 years through all of this. And I can only credit that to a couple things, and one of them is my family
Yeah.
and my dad. And I know that the caricature out there is that they have this overly permissive father. My dad was the strictest father that I knew.
I bet.
I mean, like,
I bet.
I mean, and by the way, whether someone falls prey to addiction, or alcoholism, doesn't have anything to do
No.
with and people that have gone through, and everybody knows this intuitively. It doesn't have anything to do with, whether or not you were strict or whether you were lenient or whether you were it's not a parent's fault. But I do know this, is that the chances of recovering, if you have a family
Mhm.
that won't let you go,
Yep.
are incredibly higher. I'm so lucky. The idea that it is kryptonite, I think that weak people perceive strength as a weakness.
Mhm.
I think weak people, I think people like those that ran President Trump's campaign can't imagine a relationship that my I have with my father that is not based on any other thing
But
than
love.
this, but love.
But love.
That's it. I think a lot of people talk about my family as like being Shakespearean and it's tragedy.
Mhm.
But here's the truth. My dad just got diagnosed with cancer. You know, how many people do you know that have lost a brother or sister or son? I mean, it is a universal, it's the universal condition. The only difference between us and most people is that we've had to live out those tragedies in the public eye.
Yeah.
And, and what I can't understand is how some people in this modern media ecosphere, don't get that. There's the great appeal that Joe Biden had to people was, not his 10-point plan as it relates to all of the things that you did get done
Yeah.
in terms
And
of
we
the
got a lot
economy or in
done.
terms of infrastructure or in terms of veterans or in terms all of those things. But, they saw themselves in him.
Yep.
They saw themselves. And, I think one of the things that is the most difficult thing for people to understand that are in, that, like, who are those guys? Like the Pod Save America, which,
Mhm.
by the way, like, how arrogant do you have to be to be Pod Save America? Like, we've designated them as the guys that are gonna save America. There's like 4 guys living in West Hollywood making $1 million apiece or more than that for the past 4 years,
Well,
dining out.
they
But
they
regardless,
they
is
got
he
their finger on the pulse of the
yeah, that
Democratic
finger on the
Party.
pulse of the Democratic Party right from their Hollywood studio. Yeah, anyway, with their homes in Bel Air. I mean, what the fuck?
Well, I think Clyburn said it so perfectly when he endorsed then Vice President Biden in the primary in 2020, which was we know Joe Biden and Joe Biden knows us.
Exactly.
And, there's a story that, we literally just had the 10-year anniversary of the Mother Emanuel massacre here
Yeah.
in Charleston, South Carolina. And a lot of folks don't know this. A lot of people remember the response. They remember President Obama coming down here and singing Amazing Grace, and Vice President Biden was right there with him. But before that happened, right after the massacre, right when Mother Emanuel opened back up, who was in the church?
Me and my dad.
Yes.
Yeah. It was right after my brother died.
No
Yeah.
press releases, no pomp and circumstances, but who was in that church
Yeah.
giving comfort
Yeah.
to that church family and those who lost loved ones?
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't know why it makes me as emotional as it does. I do know why it makes me as emotional as it does, because, um, you know, um, you may have seen it that way, um, that my dad was there to give comfort. Um, but the reality is, sorry, and this is uh, good tears, not bad tears, is the overcome with the emotion of that moment is that we were there to receive the comfort. And anyway, and I still feel it.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah,
I know.
yeah,
It was right around the
yeah,
time
yeah.
your
I told
brother.
you you're not gonna, you can't make me cry. You got to wait till the end before I go to the big cry. But I'm a Biden, so you know what I mean. But yeah, but that's the thing, Jamie, is that you asked like, what's the why did my dad go there? And, the we came to South Carolina after Bo died because it was probably one of the safest places outside of home that was home.
Mm.
And you know, and and he still gets that today, and I do too. That's why I'm here right now.
Well, the first time I actually had my one-on-one sit down with him at the White House, he invited me over to lunch, and I said, "Mr. President, I said I think you probably grew up in the same type of family situation that I grew up in. That you may fight like hell with each other, but let somebody try to do something to you."
Yeah,
And
that's
and
exactly
and
right.
that's when the
Yeah,
family comes
yeah,
together. Like, yeah, I can say whatever the hell I want to say about you,
yeah,
but let nobody else can.
yeah,
And the one thing that I struggle with in the Democratic Party right now is that lack of sense of family. I
yeah,
see it in the Republican Party sometimes,
yeah,
but I don't always see it in the Democratic Party. And I didn't see it in the Democratic Party in 2024
yeah.
because when your family member is in need, then you step up and you help your family.
I'm proud to be a Democrat.
Yeah.
I obviously, particularly in this environment, wouldn't be anything but a Democrat, and I'm proud of the Democratic Party. Uh, Post World War II Democratic Party
Yep.
and the post LBJ Democratic Party. I also know the history of the Democratic Party and its politics. It's Jesus. I mean, it's like, it's like the Will Rogers quote is,
Yeah.
I think, and I mean, I know it's overused, but I'm not a part of any, I'm not a part of any organized party. I'm a Democrat. I'm paraphrasing, but I mean, it's the oldest story in the book
Yeah.
is that, we eat our young. We cannibalize ourselves. We, as a party that like right now, for instance, everybody is out there saying, where's the leadership? And why isn't there any leadership? And, no one's stepping up and no one's, where's the Democratic Party? When have we ever had a leader of the Democratic Party if we did not have a president that was Democrat?
Yeah.
You know what? We are going to fight amongst ourselves for the next 3 years until there's a nominee. And then with a nominee, we better as hell get behind that nominee. And I will tell you why we lost the last election. We lost the last election because we did not remain loyal to the leader of the party. That's my position. We had the advantage of incumbency. We had the advantage of an incredibly successful administration. And the Democratic Party literally melted down,
Yeah.
and or portions of it. And again, looking back is sometimes is for losers. But in looking forward, what I think that we have to do is we have to recognize that we accomplished amazing things in those 2 years and 4 years of the last administration. And as your tenure as the chairman of the DNC, you had the greatest, the most successful midterms as a Democrat, as the chairman of the party, of any chairman since the 1932 when FDR was president. You won more state legislatures, more governorships. You picked up a seat in the Senate, and you held the House to a margin of 4
Yeah.
when everybody's saying it was going to be a blowout and we were going to lose 60
We're
seats.
gonna have a big red wave. They
It
said.
was the greatest performance of any president and any DNC chair since 1932. Since 1932. And so all of these people that are sitting back and going like, well, they should have seen the writing on the wall. We had the greatest legislative success of any president, probably since FDR, but definitely since LBJ. It was a legislative tsunami. The only way that LBJ and FDR were able to achieve it is they had supermajorities in both the Senate and the House. We did it with the thinnest margin of any president in history.
5-seat majority in the House,
Yeah.
and a 50-50 Senate on a good day.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
LBJ had 60 votes in the Senate.
Yeah.
And 300 plus in the House of Representatives.
Exactly.
But we got all of that stuff done.
We did that with Joe Manchin.
Yes, with Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema.
And Kirsten Sinema. And so we're sitting here and, these these armchair, talking heads and, the Jake Tappers and the, everybody knew that Joe Biden, was in mental and, decline and nobody would speak up. It's like, look, one of the things that I think people are going to have to start to get a grip with in a modern world is that as people get older, as people in this country are able to actually survive the ailments that they were not to be able to survive a generation ago, and you have more and more 80-year-olds that are in the workforce that have experience, that have the mental and physical capacity to continue to do their job, you're going to have to get comfortable with seeing them lose a step.
Yeah.
I mean, when I mean lose a step, I mean a physical step. Because what we did is we watched Joe Biden turn 80, then 81, and then 82. We watched him get old in front of our eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And that does not mean that you're incapacitated.
Mm-hmm.
And how could you measure whether someone is incapacitated or not? What you would do is measure them by the standard of whether they're achieving the goals that they set out to do when they took the job.
Did you see the type of shoes he had on?
Yeah, by the way, remember how much talk it was that he went to a soft-soled, and by the way, I look around this room, I mean, by the way, everybody falls prey to it because you know what Joe Biden did? Yeah, Joe Biden did get old. He got old before our eyes. My dad, you know what? My dad's gait did change.
Yeah.
And, he broke his ankle and all that kind of stuff, but you know what? Your gait changes. It does not mean that you do not have the mental capacity to be able to do your job. And then they saw him at that debate, and it was awful, and it was truly horrible.
And by the way, I want to talk to you about that debate. Like, I was in Atlanta. I was with a bunch of donors.
Yeah,
and it was not a good experience.
Yeah,
tell me about you watching that debate.
Yeah,
and then right afterwards, what were your thoughts?
Look, I was opposed to the debate. Just because I didn't know why we were
rushing into it.
I didn't know. I didn't understand why we were rushing into a debate with somebody who had just been convicted on 34 felony counts.
Yes.
And why we weren't just going to wait to see how this played out, because there were a lot of other things that were about to happen in terms of the legal woes that Donald Trump was facing at the time. Who knew that the Supreme Court would basically let him off all of it? But regardless, I thought there was a lot of runway. And I wasn't concerned with the polls at that time, as I don't think you were either, in the sense that, we were right there. And we have to understand that there's never going to be a time in which we're not in a margin of error race for the presidency ever again. It's just not going to happen.
Yep.
It was going to be a margin of error race up until the end. And at the end of the day, the reason Joe Biden got 81 million votes, more votes than anyone who's ever run for president,
Period.
period, with a higher voter participation rate than any time since 1901,
Mm-hmm.
is because he appealed to working class, real folks. And by the way, just remember this is that we all talk about the incredible popularity of Barack Obama. Barack Obama never got more than 69 million votes. My dad got 81 million votes. And what do you attribute that to? The Pod Save America guys would attribute that to, the vitriol among Democrats or among people in the United States of America as related to Donald Trump in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
What? Tell me something. Did they all of a sudden get more comfortable with Donald Trump after January 6th? Did they get more comfortable with Donald Trump after the classified documents thing? Did they get more comfortable with Trump after 34 felony counts? Did they get more comfortable with him then? I don't think so. Is what they didn't get an opportunity to do is vote for the person that they had put in office 4 years earlier. We could have survived if it weren't for the fact that we decided that not we, is that uh, people in the Democratic Party were not going to allow it to happen. What I would say is the people that represented the party, the inside elite beltway
Mm-hmm.
group of people. I love George Clooney's movies, but I don't really give a shit what he thinks about who should be the nominee for the Democratic Party. I truly respect people that fight for the same things that I fight for. But you know what? I don't know why that they were any smarter than us,
Yeah.
or my dad, or the people that had achieved what they had achieved over the last 3 years in the White House, and for the American people. You know who stood by us?
Who?
Black Caucus,
Mm-hmm.
Hispanic Caucus, the Progressive Caucus, the Democratic Party. That's the Democratic Party. You know who didn't stand by us? The fundraisers, the elite, the people that are the insiders, the people that say they're not part of the Beltway, but you know where they are? They're living in Beverly Hills, telling you or me what it is that real people care about. That's my take on it. I don't expect you to go that far.
So just reflecting back on the 2024 uh, election, and coming out of the debate, do you think your dad stepping out was a mistake?
No. Well, first of all, I think that it is uh, an unfair question to ask someone who believes in my dad that their
Yeah.
dad can do anything.
Yeah.
Okay, um, but I know that it wasn't a mistake in that moment, because
Mhm.
what he did is, I think that he made the only choice that was left to him, which was either save the party or save himself,
Mhm.
and he chose to save the party. And in so doing, I think did one of the most selfless acts of anybody that I know as a student of history of politics and of elected officials. And do I think that he could have won? I think that he could have won. Yeah. But uh, again, it doesn't mean that I don't respect other people's opinion about that. But
Yeah.
because nobody could actually answer that question. But of course, I think that he could won.
Well, one of the things I often get, and I've gotten some pushback, and I've been told that suffering from cognitive dissonance from our friends in the pod save world, um, because of my loyalty to the president and sticking by him post debate, and to this day continue to stick by him,
Mhm.
because in my mind you elect a president to get shit done, not because of their age, not because of how they look, not because of what background they have, but to do good things in order to improve the lives of people.
Yeah.
And I stick by this. Show me what president in the last 25, 30 years has got more shit done than Joe Biden did.
Yeah.
You really can't. I mean, the facts are the facts.
Yeah.
You look at the legislation and you look at the impact that that legislation will have on generations, not just the right now, but generations to come. I mean,
Yeah.
there will be kids who will grow up not drinking out of pipes with lead
Yeah.
because of Joe Biden. There will be judges that look like all of America because of Joe Biden. He appointed more black judges to the courts of appeal than all presidents combined,
All
right? All
presidents
presidents
combined.
combined. First black woman sitting on the Supreme Court. Who did that? That was Joe Biden. The first black person as a DNC chair that was appointed by a president. That
Yeah.
was Joe Biden.
The first black woman as vice president of the
The
United
first
States.
black woman
Yeah.
as vice president of the United States,
Yeah.
Joe Biden.
Yeah.
The state that was the gateway of enslaved people coming to this country, right?
Yep.
Nobody before Joe Biden ever decided to take on Iowa and New Hampshire in terms of being the first two states in the presidential primary.
Yep.
And guess who had the balls to do it?
Yep.
Joe Biden,
Yep.
right? And so that's not just by happenstance. That's not him saving his ass. That's about what's in here
Yeah.
and what he believes.
Exactly.
And so when people ask me, well, why do you stick by Joe Biden? Is because he has always stuck by us.
Yeah.
Right? Even on the student loan stuff, right? He made a promise on student loan and he went past the promise that he made on student loans. And he said, you know what? We are also going to, for those folks who got Pell Grants. Now, for some people, they're like, well, what the hell is a Pell Grant?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody like me knows what a Pell Grant is. I would not have gone to school but for Pell Grants.
Yeah.
And you know who knows a lot about Pell Grants? A lot of black folks who are first generation college students because they got those Pell Grants.
Yeah.
Joe Biden did that,
Yep.
right? And I don't believe he gets enough credit. So when you ask the chair of the party, yes, the chair of a party of any party is going to stick by their nominee. But part of the reason why I also stuck by Joe Biden and as fiercely as I did is because I saw the community that I grew up in and the people that I am from, the community that I'm from, and how the policies that this president and the people that this president has appointed have reflected those people and the community and the values that we're coming from. So of course I'm going to stand by somebody who's always stood by us.
Yeah.
What was your family thinking during that period? Were you guys just like pissed off and mad, or were you sad, or what was the sentiment within the family? Did you think, well, maybe, just damn it, if you guys want it, then just take it and we'll just go right off in the sunset? Or was it, or were you saying, we should fight this thing through and through? Because one of the things I told folks is the primaries are done. Like the only person who can make a decision for Joe Biden not to be the nominee is Joe Biden. Nobody else can make that decision. I can't, even as chair of the party. I had no authority or legal authority or any authority to make that decision because the people, the voters had spoken. They chose Joe Biden to be the nominee of the primary.
Yeah.
So this is, post the primaries, post the debates. What were you thinking at that point in time? And what was your counsel to your dad?
Well, I want to first say this. I don't just like Vice President Harris. I love her.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's an incredible leader. And if she were elected, that she would have made an incredible president.
Mm-hmm.
And her dedication and loyalty, which at the end of the day, as vice president, is the only and most important thing, is not your blind loyalty, but your informed loyalty to the person that you are serving with, to the president.
And your dad did that well for Barack Obama.
And I believe that he did that extremely well. And I believe the Vice President
Kamala Harris
did. And
did that
I
extremely
can
well.
also say, just on a personal level, her kindness, just on a human level,
Yeah.
to my family, to myself, to me personally, is I'll be forever grateful for. So anything that I say about, well, my dad should have stayed in, it doesn't
Yeah.
have any context of,
It's not about
anything,
her.
and not
Yeah.
about her in
Yeah.
any way. That debate was awful. When my dad walked out, I knew that he had an off night.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He wasn't drooling, but he had an off night. You know what I mean? Particularly when people expected Joe Biden, who had
Yeah.
so many great debate moments,
Yep.
did not step up to that moment. After that happened, everybody in the Black Caucus came out and supported my dad.
Yep.
They all came to the White House to visit him to check his pulse to make sure that he was okay. You had a group of governors, beginning with Governor Walz and Governor Moore and
Governor
Governor
Hochul.
Newsom and Governor Hochul, and they all came to the White House and they sat down with him. They set a bar for my dad. They said, "Okay, well, if you can do this hour and a half long interview with George Stephanopoulos, and you make it through that, then, like, okay, we'll see how he does there." And he did that interview, and it was great. And he did the interview, and he got through the interview, and everybody said, "Okay, well, now the next hurdle is you're going to have a press conference
Foreign policy.
on foreign policy,
Yeah.
and it's going to be an hour and a half, and it's all open questions." And he sat there for an hour and a half with 150 reporters. He took every single question. He gave a tour de force, historical, around the world, and going back 50 years.
It was a master
It was a
class.
master class in foreign policy, completely open. He got done that. Then the next hurdle was that he was going to go out and give that speech, I think, in North Carolina, and he did that.
Yep.
Then the next hurdle was he was going to go out and give the keynote speech to the NAACP.
In Las
Everybody kept
Vegas.
setting a new hurdle.
Yep.
And, and you would have the speaker emeritus that would say, "Well, I'm going to leave it up to, but I don't know." And they had already made a decision. They had clearly made a decision. And when I say they, I mean the speaker. And I heard Alexandra Pelosi say something, call like, put your big girl pants on to my mom or something. And I kind of feel like saying, who the fuck do you think you are? I would never speak about your mom that way.
Yeah.
I would never speak about your father that way. I would never insult your parents that way. Even to this day, I would never refer to the speaker as anything but speaker.
Yep.
She has given more to this country than most people ever will.
Tremendous
Ever.
respect for her. Yep.
But for her daughter to talk to the First Lady of the United States that gave 50 years of her life to the service of this country. So, what I will say is this: whatever the case may be, whether it was the intervention of God or whatever it was, you were out there.
Mm-hmm.
He got an incredible reception. He gave an incredible speech at the NAACP event
They were
in Las
chanting,
Vegas.
"Joe, don't go.
Joe, don't go." As
Yeah, I
soon as he
remember.
came out, he gave that incredible line about, I know what a black job is, and everybody went wild. It was an incredible experience. As you know, that people lined up in the back to take pictures of them for over an hour and a half, and we sat and shook every single hand. And they said, "Please do not get out. Do not let them do this to you." And he woke up in the morning with COVID.
He got COVID. I remember.
And it was like the worst timing of the worst timing,
know.
or maybe it was the best.
I know.
And in that moment, they descended, and you had to make a choice. And they basically said they hit the nuclear button. In my opinion, is what they did. And I let my dad tell the story himself, because it's not my story. But whatever it was, is they basically said, we're gonna contest you at the convention. And my dad, in true Joe Biden fashion, I think did one of the most selfless things any president or elected official at that level has ever done. And he said, "Okay, if this is what you want, then I'm going to pass the torch." And he did. And for anonymous sources and off the record uh, reporters that don't have one single person to go on the record for them,
Yes.
to sit around and say that there was some conspiracy to cover up
There was a cover-up.
Look, you saw my dad every day. They saw my dad every day. Yeah, he lost a step. Yeah, he would speak. Yeah, he spoke more quietly than he did before. Well, that's what happens when you turn 79, 80, 81, 82, when you're working 18 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week. That does not mean you do not have the capacity to become to continue to do the job that you are showing people that you can do on a daily basis.
What's your feeling about those folks? In the Tapper Thompson book, and I didn't spend any money on it. Somebody lied and said there was some moment in which he did not recognize me at a CBC event. I was like, it must have been another round-headed black guy, because I sure as hell don't know who you're talking about. Because the president always recognized me, and he and I always joked about Mr. Clyburn, because that
Yeah.
that was our connection. Um, and so I refuted that and never got any feedback, and they never got. I knew the president didn't say it, and if I didn't say it, then who the hell did, right?
Yeah.
And this as a lawyer, you bring that shit in the court, it's gonna get kicked out,
Yeah.
right? Because it's not credible.
Yeah.
But eh, that book, there were a lot. I am told, and from the reporting that I've heard, is that there were some cabinet folks that said, "Well, we didn't meet with the president and this and that." I mean, what's your thought about that? I mean, do you have a thought on that? I mean,
Yeah. I don't know. You know, I mean, I said there's all of these like, trite um saying, if you want a friend in Washington, get a
get a
dog,
dog.
you know.
Yeah,
Um,
that's very true.
yeah.
I think they
But
were thinking about people
yeah,
like Lindsey Graham too. But
yeah, exactly. But to be more serious about it is that uh at the end of the day, I think that most people are governed by their own self-interest.
yeah,
Okay. There's a lot of blame to go around for what just happened in politics and for the failure of the Democratic Party to hold on to the presidency. I think it's human nature in the immediate aftermath to want to blame people.
yeah.
But what we also know in this environment is what sells, Jamie. What sells is the idea of a conspiracy. What sells is a cover up. Now, one of the things that people, I think, in their personal lives understand the ability to keep a secret in Washington is zero.
You can't.
Okay. And when somebody comes and tells you that there was this grand conspiracy and the Biden family was covering up this, that, or the other thing, and this is that you realize the fishbowl that he was in? Do you realize the daily touch points that he had with people that, by the way, are not necessarily loyal to him? Every single day, hundreds of people, every single day during that period of time, and you can't get one of them
To
to
go on
go
the
on the
record?
record
Yeah.
and say, "I saw the president do X," or "He said this," and he failed to press the red button at the right time. You can't get one of them, not one of them, to say that on the record. So I just say to people, like, okay, like if I can't convince you of that, then I don't know what to say.
Mhm.
You know, you were one of the only people that was named in the book as having said anything, and you immediately came out and said that's just flat out not true.
Same thing with Jake Sullivan.
Yeah.
Jake
Oh,
said the
Jake
same.
came out and
Yeah,
said that's just
Jake said the
flat out
same
not
thing.
true. Yeah.
Even the Clooney event, I was there with my family
Perfect example.
at the Clooney event.
I was
Clooney
there
said-
with you.
Yes, Clooney
Yeah.
was only there for what, 10, 15 minutes,
Yeah.
if that. I mean,
Yeah.
he wasn't there that long.
Yeah.
But that whole incident,
Yeah.
they've been playing this video
Yeah.
of President Obama and President Biden on the stage,
Yeah.
and President Obama grabbing President Biden's elbow to guide him off. Hunter, I was there. My wife and I were sitting right in the
I was
front
sitting
row.
10 seats down from you.
Right
Yeah.
there. Do you remember there were about 2 or 3 guys, young white guys in their 20s,
Yeah.
who stood up and they were yelling at the president about Palestine,
Exactly. About Gaza.
about Gaza.
Yeah.
And he was listening to see what they were saying.
Yeah.
And that's when Obama grabbed his elbow to
Yeah.
guide him off,
Yeah.
so he didn't engage in
Yeah.
that. It
Yeah.
wasn't that
I'll tell you.
he like spanned out and like
Yeah.
didn't know where the hell he was. Because I asked my wife just so that to make sure that I didn't have
Yeah.
cognitive decline. I was
Yeah.
like, Marie, don't you remember that? She said, yeah, I remember that. And I thought it was so rude for them to do that while
Yeah.
in the midst of the whatchamacallit of
Yeah.
this event.
Yeah.
But the president was trying to listen to see what they were saying to him.
You and I both know one thing too, is that what is the one thing that drives Obama more crazy about my dad than anything? is when he sits around and he continues to talk to people in a
Yes.
crowd, because then he can't also leave the stage at the same
That's
time.
exactly
And he
right.
never likes hanging around
He doesn't. He doesn't
to
like
do rope
taking it.
lines.
He doesn't like
He doesn't like
rope
standing-
lines. He doesn't like to take the
He
pictures.
doesn't like to take the
That's
pictures.
just not. Yeah,
And
most people think that President Obama likes that, but he doesn't.
He hates it.
He hates
and
it.
he's hated it ever since. And that's why, literally, if you ever watch old tape of my dad and Obama at an event together, Obama would walk off one side of the stage and he'd let my dad walk off the other, because my dad would then spend an hour with the crowd afterwards.
He would
Yeah.
take a selfie with
Okay.
every damn person that's in. And I've seen it.
Exactly.
I've seen it at DNC
Exactly.
meetings.
Exactly.
All 400
Yeah.
and some odd DNC members plus the staff. He will stay there.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yep.
And grab the phone, take a picture.
Yep.
And chat.
I just was doing it yesterday with them. We stopped at a restaurant in Philadelphia, and it took us an hour to get in, and it took us an hour to get out after breakfast. But my point is this. Take that as a perfect example, okay? I was about to say I really like George Clooney as an actor, but the truth of the matter is, I'll be honest, I really don't like George Clooney as an actor or as a person. But regardless is this, okay? Is that George Clooney, before that event, and it literally threatened to pull out of the event. How many times? 5, 6 times, over and over again, saying that he was so upset because my dad refused to recognize the arrest warrant for Netanyahu and would not commit to not allowing Netanyahu to enter the country after the ICC warrant went out for his arrest for war crimes. And the reason is
Because
that
his
George
wife,
Clooney,
right?
as if we were supposed to know this, is because his wife was
Yeah.
one of the principal architects of that warrant. Okay, and so he was saying he's not going to show up. He's not going to show up. He's not going to show up. And then he said, "I will only do it on this date," which required my dad to fly back, I think, from Singapore to Italy,
Yes.
and then Italy directly to Los Angeles, and stay there for the event. Wake up at 7:00. This, by the way, it was Father's Day.
Yeah.
A year ago.
Yeah.
So, with all of that being the background, I'm standing there with him, and Clooney only came out and talked for 5 minutes. Didn't speak to anybody in the crowd. Didn't go and shake anybody's hand. The only person that I saw him talk to was President Obama. And when other people were coming in line to greet my dad, to say hello to my dad, anytime they're doing these pictures, as you know, there's somebody standing next to the president.
Mr. President.
That says, "Mr. President."
Jamie Harrison, chair of
George Clooney
Yes.
and Julia Roberts.
That's exactly right.
Not because my dad didn't know who George Clooney, because I was
Because
literally
they do
whispering.
it.
Literally, I was whispering in his ear, saying, "Dad, fuck him." Literally, that's what I was saying. Like, you got to be kidding me, because I was so mad. It tired him so out. I knew that he had to go to the debate. He's 81 years old. It doesn't have anything to do with other than literally, like, my dad needs at least 2 hours of sleep a night, and you guys forced him into like just let's get him home, and he's here. And literally, he said, "Mr. Biden, or President Biden, George Clooney, and Julia Roberts," and he claims, in his arrogance, that my dad, the President of the United States, didn't know who the actor was that had written him and his staff. I don't know, 10, 5, 6, 4 letters, texting the staff over and over again, saying he's going to pull out. He's going to embarrass the administration. He's going to embarrass the Democratic Party. He's going to pull out of the biggest fundraiser because you disrespected his wife, because you don't agree with the policy as it relates to an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't give a shit. That's good for the party? That really, do you think in middle America, that woman that talked about, that voter in Green Bay, Wisconsin, gives a shit what George Clooney thinks about who she should vote for? And I'm not saying he's not a good Democrat. I'm not saying that he's not smart. I'm not saying that he's not a brilliant actor. I'm not saying that he's not a good friend to the friends that he's friends to. But in that moment, no, he wasn't. And he didn't do the right thing. And to say something that is so patently untrue in order to justify what you did afterwards is cowardly, is weak.
Well, and, one of the things that I wanted to get for a lot of these folks is a history book to understand. One of the things Clyburn mentioned to me, he said, when all of this was percolating, and he said, "Jamie, you need to think about every time that we've had a contested race at the convention, Democrats have lost.
Every single time.
Every single time that we've had a contested race on the floor of the convention, we have lost.
Yes.
And that was what history taught us.
Yeah.
And he said, we need to be very, very careful. And he said, the problem we have in this party is a lot of people don't know our history. They don't know where we have been, and therefore they make these dumb mistakes and these errors and put us in a bad situation. And we were approaching that situation. And I often say, and I said right after your dad decided to step down, that it's the most selfless act that I've ever seen in American politics ever.
Yeah.
Whereas Donald Trump had the most selfish act,
Yeah.
right? He was willing to risk the life of his vice president. Joe Biden was willing to give up the greatest power on the face of this planet to his vice president.
Yeah.
Right? Because there were some people who wanted Joe Biden to step down, but they didn't want Kamala Harris either.
Yeah, we know who they are.
Yeah. They did not want Kamala Harris as well. They were already plans.
Should I name them?
I mean,
no.
At our table, you
but,
can.
But you're right. Okay. And I look, I don't know. I tell you what, Jamie, you can attest to this. If not anything, Joe Biden is loyal.
Yes.
Is loyal.
He's loyal.
And so I don't ever want to say anything on that. It's like I'm speaking on his behalf.
No, I understand.
Because my dad wouldn't say an ill word, regardless.
Yeah.
Of how wronged he was, and you know it.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean his son can't feel it sometimes. And like I said, I'll say it over and over. I say it just one more time to make certain that it's clear. Is I love President Obama.
Mm-hmm.
I love what he achieved for this country. I respect and honor what the people that work for him were able to achieve in the 8 years that he was president. And I feel the same about Speaker Pelosi and the people that have tirelessly worked on her behalf and her staff and her family to allow her to achieve the things that she's achieved on behalf of millions and millions of Americans. Okay? I would only ask this, is that they showed the same respect to my dad. You know Joe Biden.
Yeah.
You think Joe Biden was involved in some cover-up? Do you think Jake Tapper's telling the truth when he says that I was the acting chief of staff of the president? I was in that White House 12 days over the course of the last 2 years of the administration. Clearly, because I had other things going on. Okay? You ask one person to go on the record that would ever tell you that I was in any way making a single decision about anything in that White House. I stayed as far away as I possibly could, which, by the way, broke my heart.
Yeah.
For him to go and lie on TV and say that I got my sister-in-law addicted to crack and I was having this and all of these really, really horrible personal things. And I don't understand the vitriol that he has towards me in particular, but I don't get it. And what I think is this, is that in their hearts, these people have a hole. And they can't understand that Joe Biden is actually who he says he is.
Mm-hmm.
I heard Chuck Todd say that Joe Biden really is the worst of the worst because he's a bad person. And he's the exact opposite of who he says he is. Because if he really loved his family, he would have never run for president. Because he had 2 children that were suffering from addiction, and he just had lost his family, and his family was falling apart. And I feel like, just like, number one, who the fuck are you to say what, Joe Biden as a parent? But I can tell you, as his son, with nothing to gain from this anymore, right? Nothing to gain from sitting here and defending my father or saying what I truly feel is this, is that the single thing that has always united us as a family and given us purpose and given us the feeling throughout all of the things that we had to go through, they made us feel, and our dad ingrained this into us. And my dad ingrained it into the entirety of the family, is that there's nothing greater, there's no power greater than waking up in the morning and putting 2 feet on the ground and realizing that you have an opportunity to make a difference in somebody else's life. So what would bring me out of my addiction, my dad knew, is a greater sense of purpose that my brother lived and died for. What would bring me out of my addiction and heal the family was for all of us to work together towards a greater and more important, incredible goal of not just becoming president of the United States, but be able to achieve the things that he was able to achieve on behalf of veterans, on behalf of the whole world, on behalf of the millions of children that he lifted out of poverty. You go down the list. Because we literally we had dedicated our lives in service to that. Remember, my dad entered the vice presidency as the poorest man that ever took that office. He left as the poorest man that ever left that office. He entered the presidency with the least, I think the lowest net worth of any person that had ever entered that office. And here I am, and I'm rebuilding my life with millions and millions and millions of dollars in debt for legal fees that I had to pay. Millions of dollars in debt. But you know what? What I think about it all, my God, was it worth it?
Yeah.
My God, was it worth it? What he was able to do in our small way as a family, to be there, to support him, not to be a part of, just sit in policy meetings, never sat and told anybody in the White House or the vice presidency or anywhere what to do or what to say. I didn't have I didn't open up a club, executive club and charge people $500,000 to go to it so that they could speak with people in the cabinet. I never picked up the phone and called a single cabinet member. I wouldn't know who to call.
You're not selling Joe Biden cell phones now,
Yeah,
right?
tell
Or
me,
crypto coins.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But I'll tell you what is the greatest honor in my life is all of those people that come up to me and say, please tell your dad how much I appreciate what he did for my family when he did X. Millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people that in whether it's in Ukraine or whether it is, refugees from Afghanistan, or whether it is, you go down the list and the impact that he's had on people's lives is immeasurable. And that's why we did it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. But before we wrap up, one of the traditions for this new show is that we like to give awards. And there's an award that I like to give out on the show, and it's the Sit Your Ass Down Award.
Yeah.
Who would you give this very prestigious award to? The Sit Your Ass Down Award. Somebody, you're just tired, you don't want to hear them anymore. They need to sit down, take a rest. Here's a seat. I know it's probably, you probably have a whole stadium full of seats. You want
how many seats can we?
I don't know, but
in light of the most recent of offensive things, is I'd give that award to Mike Lee. I grew up on my dad's hip, my brother and I, walking the halls of the Senate.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine. And by the way, remember, my dad served with Jesse Helms and Strom Thurmond. And people, people that look back and think, oh my gosh, he's like right wing, look, I can't even imagine any of them ever in a million years. Two people, two state legislatures shot. The Speaker Emeritus of the House of the Minnesota legislature. By all accounts, one of the most wonderful human beings, mothers, daughters,
wonderful person.
Sisters in the world. Everybody. Governor Walz speaks about her like they were family and like she was a sister. Yeah. She worked on Capitol Hill. To post jokes about it, pictures. Have we lost our humanity? I mean, literally, is he out of his fucking mind? Here it is. I tell you one thing, is that some of the nicest, most decent people I've ever met in my church are members of the Latter-day Saints, of the Church of the Latter-day Saints. And I really mean this. I have never met a group of people that were more committed to family, faith and service than people in the LDS. I can't imagine that anyone in the leadership of that church can look at what Mike Lee did and not say that is an abomination and sinful.
I think you're right.
Sinful. So sit your ass down. Yeah.
Mike Lee, you are the recipient of the Sit Your Ass Down Award. And didn't he deserve that?
Yeah.
One last question. How's your dad doing? The cancer diagnosis, he is in our prayers. The prayer circles down here in South Carolina. With,
my
Joe
dad.
Biden's
He's
name
literally indestructible.
Yes.
Right now he's in D.C. He's having meetings all day. I know he just called me before I walked in here to say hello to you. And Monday we went up to see my sister and have breakfast in Philadelphia, and about 100 people lined up for him afterwards. It's a kick in the teeth. You know what I mean? I mean, nobody, everybody, but it's like, as I said at the beginning of this, it's like, cancer's like one. I think it's almost ubiquitous in the lives of anybody that and he's tough.
He is.
He is tough, and he's got a good diagnosis or prognosis. Not a bad diagnosis, good prognosis, in that it is treatable. Not curable, but it's treatable. And so just as long as he follows direction.
Yes.
And that's a little bit of a problem.
Well,
listen, he's pretty stubborn. But just
but
taking
he
a
ain't
pill.
stubborn when Dr. Biden tells him.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
we
right.
know who the real boss is.
Right. That's exactly right. So,
well, tell him he's in our prayers.
I will. Thank you, Jimmy.
We're here for him.
Okay. Thanks,
Hunter Biden. Let me just say you are always welcome at our table. You have a home here in South Carolina.
I know that. Thank you.
Looking forward to having you back. We can go down to Charleston, get some shrimp and grits, and
absolutely, absolutely,
another clobber and fish fry. But thank you, my friend.
Absolutely,
really appreciate it. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you enjoyed today's show, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Pixel Plus, YouTube, Spotify, or anywhere you find your podcasts. To be the first to know who will be at our table next, be sure to subscribe to our Substack on atourtablepodcast.com. At Our Table with Jamie Harrison is a production of Vision Blue Media. Our founding executive producers are Jason Hayter and Jamie Harrison. Our producers are Kyle Kelly and Emily Harrell. Our content consultants are Ernie Grigg and Clay Middleton. Our digital communications are led by Celie Riccio. Neil Rossini of FWRV LLP provides production legal. Wade Sellers, Kyle Kelly, Jay Matheson, Jeremy Dickerson, and Adrian Williams are our field production team. Alana Davis is our intern. Title sequence by Tom Hunt. Our theme song, Blonde Gone, is written by Dewey and published by Alibi Music Library. Special thanks to Crystal Spain, Jay Parmalee, and the South Carolina Democratic Party. Special thanks to Steve Benjamin and the team at Mansion on Blanding for on-site support. And thank you to Hunter Biden and his team. Tune in next week for our next episode, where I sit down with Governor Wes Moore. I'm Jamie Harrison, and I look forward to another conversation at our table.